you very much, Madam MC. And I'd like to thank all the panelists that is joining me here. Good morning from me to everyone. I think this is the first panel of the day. This will be interesting discussions. Yesterday we heard a lot on the APG and how the power systems will evolve in ASEAN regions and how basically the renewables energy would take a big role in the powering our energy in these regions. And today discussions, I think we'd like to discuss more on how these transformations that needs to happen in terms of grid resiliency, what will it take for the power system to transform, and how basically the interconnections would help in managing those challenges moving ahead. We've had a study on the renewable energy long-term roadmap in the ASEAN regions. Yesterday, it's highlighted that perhaps in the next 5 years, our renewable energy across the regions, the penetrations of renewable will reach, on average, like 20%. And more or less in different countries, it will look different, a bit different, but I think it is pertinent discussions that we need to start discussing, and how we could put a strategy together to address those in terms of mitigating the intermittency, and how the power system should be strengthened to enable those kind of higher penetrations to the grid. So I think today we have a lot of experts. We have Mr. Yus, Deputy Chief New Energy Officer of TNB. And then we have Mr. Chan Shiming, Power Grid Specialist from Huawei. And then we have Mr. Arun Uni, the Senior Director Consulting Service from GE Vernova. And then we have Dr. Alan Wang, Senior Director of APAC Regional Integrated Services, Gas, Power, and Climate Solutions from S&P Global Commodity Insights. So we have a really good expert to talk about this stuff. And I'd like to start first the discussions to kickstart with the questions for everyone. So resilience can mean reliability, flexibility, or security. So what does resilience mean for the ASEAN, and why is it urgent now? I think we can start with Mr. Yus to answer these questions.
Thank you, Shani. Thank you, everyone, for having us here early in the morning. So I hope everyone is awake and ready. Thank you, panelists. So resilience, I think if you go by strict definition, you're looking at the ability to withstand disruptive forces. Taking it back to power system context, resilience is one of the most important criteria, or one of the most important point that power system operators, utilities has to ensure. In terms of looking back, in terms of power planning, there are three main criteria. People always talk about energy trilemma, balancing the cost, the environment, as well as the reliability. And I think looking back on this is not something new. For TNB as a power system provider here in Peninsular Malaysia, and also as a developer of power plants, I think we put very big emphasis to make sure that we are always able to supply competitive power, to make sure that the power is reliable, the security of supply is addressed, and lately I think there's more emphasis to make sure that the power that we provide is clean and sustainable. So ASEAN Power Grid, which is also not a new concept to the ASEAN region, we've seen and we've spoken earlier this morning, there are readily available connections between countries. And part of the initiative when the governments or the utilities went through with the ASEAN interconnection earlier, for example, Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, Malaysia, was to address partly or enhance the resiliency to make sure that the system are stronger together. So we already has a very good starting point, making sure that the system are connected, making sure that the system are secured, and now comes in, you know, the additional factor of intermittent renewables, intermittent power supply. We are so used to stable power supply coming from thermal plants, coming from dispatchable plants, but when you have this more and more penetration of intermittent sources like solar and wind, then, you know, things are slightly different, and different ways of doing things are required, which I think later we'll deliberate more on that. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Yus, for highlighting how we started the ASEAN Power Grid. What's the reason? And I think the reason of like resiliency is more pertinent for us to have more interconnections in the region to help, to help the countries managing this various renewable energy. So I'd like to turn to our technology provider here, Mr. Chan, on what's your take on the resiliency part and why we need to do it now.
Yes, of course. So the resiliency for Asian grid is more important than just having the resiliency for one country. So the most important thing is to avoid cascading failure from one country to their neighbors. And in the past, we have so many examples. The latest Spanish grid, they had the blackout, and then they dragged down Portugal and a little bit of the southern France. And also the biggest cascading failure in the history, one of them is the 2003 United States one. So one fault tripping led to like so many different states of blackout that impacted 55 million people. So we want to make sure that every country, especially when in the future Asian grid is well AC connected, interconnected, with interactions, so we don't want to see one country having the blackout impacting the other countries. So currently in Europe, they have standards making sure every country is contributing to their reliability to the entire synchronized European grid. Because they have been seeing that some country with higher renewable penetration, they are lacking of inertia, and they are relying on the neighboring country to provide the inertia. So right now, Europe is looking at the inertia requirement for each country to provide, making sure each country power system has enough the inertia H constant, at least more than 2 seconds. So this is something that we need to kind of learn from the more mature countries. Yeah, that's my answer.
Thank you for that. I think you highlight also important point as well. Well, we are there is a benefit when we are interconnecting, but as more that we are well interconnected, that comes challenge as well in terms of making sure that we have aligned standards and operating procedures so that there is no risk of like cascading failures as well. So I think that's also relate to what we are doing under the ASEAN Power Grid initiative in ensuring we have a minimum operating standards for the cross-border interconnection. So thank you for that. So I'll turn to Mr. Arun. What's your take on resiliency and why we should do it now?
Thank you, Shani, and good morning, everyone, and thank you for having us here, and thank you to the panelists also. So for me, resilience of the grid per se is the ability of the grid to bounce back after an event. So, it's slightly different from reliability. Reliability, when we look at it, reliability is how you protect the grid from an event not to happen. But resilience is basically the ability of the grid to bounce back after the event has happened. Now, as you have more renewable integration into the system, the grids become more and more susceptible to various things, which will include weather conditions, because as the weather changes, you have, let's say, a heat wave or a surge in demand, or you have cascading failures of generating stations, and including in today's times, you might even look at a grid, how it is resilient against cyber attacks. So resilience has different facets to it. What I would like to highlight here is that over the last one day, we have been looking at interconnections for resource sharing and resource optimization. But interconnections with neighbors is also a very important tool to develop grid resilience, for the simple reason that if you are connected to a system which has a demand pattern or a weather which is not correlated with your operating conditions, then you always have a better chance to build a more resilient system to be connected by being connected with that system. So because a simple example would be that you might have a weather failure, but the neighboring place may not have that. So you generally tend to get a lot of support from neighboring areas. So interconnections as a tool for improving grid resilience is something which is, I would say, slightly underrated. So it's something which needs to be looked at. And yeah, that's my take on that. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we'll dig deep more on how we can use the interconnections as a tool to have like increase the grid resiliency between the two power system. But before going that deep, I would like to go to Dr. Allen to answer this question.
Okay, thanks. I think all our speakers covers all the different aspects of the grid resilience. One thing I want to echo what you just mentioned. This topic is not brand new. It has been there for many, many years. In our view, if you look at different market and different system at different time frame, we have different challenges. Nowadays, what we are facing is we have both change from generation fuel mix and the demand pattern. That brings unique and a new wave of challenge for the grid system. From the generation side, we're moving away from the very legacy, centralized generation, coal plus hydro with more renewables and distribute generation. We even have more behind meters, variable generations. We have battery, and then we create some prosumers who is consuming and generating. So that's a unique challenge bring to the grid system. And on the demand side, we know we have more variable demand. We're slowing down our residential sector demand growth, moving towards to our C&I sector. We have electrical vehicles, we have more variable demand. All of these things brings the new challenge to the grid. So that's my first point. I think the whole topic is a changing topic. So now the situation is quite different from 5 years ago, 10 years ago. So that's the key difference we observed when we look at different market. And the second thing I want to highlight is because we're putting this discussion under the context of ASEAN. ASEAN is still one of the highest demand growth or GDP growth region among the world. We call it emerging market. So we normally can achieve double demand growth above the global average level. I think from now on, we still see the trend, this region demand is still going to continue. So which means that brings a unique challenge to both parties like technology providers and utilities, because we're not only discussing about how to enhance our grid to make it more reliable. It's actually, we also need to capture the fast growing demand, right? To serve the demand first and then make it more strong, robust, and resilient. So that is my comment.
Thank you for that. I think you raised two important points that we need to look at this grid resilience topic in a bigger way, because in the fact that it's a new challenging and new landscape as well, both for the utility system operators and also regulators perhaps to balance and respond to the needs, but also a challenge to how to evolve in the power system itself. So on that point, I want to touch upon the Malaysian power system itself, and we've discussed earlier on how to respond to the new demands that is coming, like data centers and etc. It's a lot of needs on renewables as well for fulfilling those new demands, as well as on how Malaysia wants to achieve their national climate target as well. And this utility will play a big role in ensuring the reliability and integrating more renewables. So can you share, Pa, on what's the strategy of the utilities in handling those?
Yep. Thank you, Shani. Malaysia aspires to achieve net zero status by 2050. That entails to having capacity mix of renewable energy of up to 70% by 2050. And I think we have moved quite aggressively towards that. And I think the reliance on coal especially is planned to be reduced over time. We will have the first big group of coal plants potentially going to be retired by 2030 and expected for the coal plant to be weed out by 2043. Nevertheless, I think the move towards that, as we indicated, and with all the changes that are happening, I just want to point out another important factor that I think lately has become a significant risk, which is climate. We have also seen, climate change effect becoming bigger and more dangerous, and recognizing that. So going forward, there's a need for us to enhance our capability and ability to predict. People are talking about AI assisted or digital assistance in projecting demand and supply. And in the electricity system, as most of us are aware, matching demand and supply is essential. So part of our moving forward is putting emphasis more on AI and digital, enhancing and converting our substations from analog to digital substation to enable us to react better to all these changes in the system. Not only that, I think the expansion of the grid system itself, strengthening, expansion, maintaining the grid system to make sure that the reaction is able to be deployed when required. That's also another thing. As you can see, regulation-wise, there's also changes in regulation. There's also changes in the grid system to allow more or higher penetration of renewables, especially solar. And as you are aware, Malaysia or Peninsular Malaysia, the main RE source is solar. So government, utilities, the regulators has moved towards enabling more and more co-located solutions. In the future, we do foresee for solar and battery to be co-located. There's also a pilot project being deployed for grid-connected standalone BESS, which is on the way. We have just concluded in July the first bidding round for BESS, grid-connected, and many more expected to come. So I think moving forward as we go, things are changing very fast. We are adopting, like what Dr. Allen mentioned just now. You have prosumers, you have EVs, you have centralized plants still providing energy to the system, and at the same time you have intermittent renewables. So with all these changes, we are committing a significant amount of capex to make sure that the grid system is able to increase the resilience, able to take the disruptive forces, and also looking at the improvement in the processes as well.
You mentioned the role of technology. You mentioned the need of investment as well. I think it's a nice segue for me to ask the other panelists as well. On the technology side, perhaps I would like to turn to Mr. Chan. How can digitalizations and AI basically strengthen the grid's reliability and contribute to addressing these challenges?
Thank you, Shani. Okay, so of course the AI can be used towards doing a better forecast of the intermittent energy. And today I also want to share there's more issues with the solar technology or inverter-based technology. I actually have a page of a slide to show, please. Okay. Okay, to start with, it's very easy. It's not going to be very technical. So we have the conventional generation, and you can see that they provide voltage, frequency, and inertia. So we take them for granted because they have been there in the past. But then if you go further down to the slide, click one more button. And then more of the conventional energy is going to be replaced by the inverter-based generation. If you can click on the slide. And you can see here, we're using the inverter or converter to convert the DC energy to AC energy. The issue is that they can take care of the energy balance issue that we have in the grid. However, they do not provide inertia, they do not provide the transient voltage stability. So my slide is showing what is missing here when we have too much renewable generation, is that if you look at the bottom of the slide, is that when we are replacing with the synchronous generator with the inverter-based generation, which is the normal battery, the normal panels and wind plants, then we need a new AI or digitalization technology, which is currently called grid forming, to fill in the gaps. It's basically a very straightforward technology. It has been in the past called virtual synchronous generator, VSG, using the power electronics. And 2 years ago in United Kingdom, they have redefined this term into grid forming. So the term is new, but the technology has been there for many years. And by using this technology, so not only the battery can take care of the intermittency issues with the solar, but also it can take care of the transient issues from having too much renewable generation. In Europe, currently they have been using this standard across, making all the battery after 3 years, around 2029, to be required to have this capability to help with the high renewable penetration in Europe. So that's my sharing.
Thank you for highlighting what kind of technology and solutions that is there right now and developing and also proven in terms of like new ways to handle the intermittency of the various renewable energy. Then perhaps we haven't touched on the discussions on basically we have a new environment, new demands, and then new sort of like sources of renewables to be integrated in the grid. So the systems are evolving and it needs to be transformed. And part of that is basically we can do it with the planning. So I'd like to turn to Mr. Arun on how do you see that the planning would help like mitigating or like addressing these challenges, and perhaps you can also touch upon what kind of like solutions in different stages of renewable energy integrations that we should look at.
Thank you, Shani. So, so when you look at any system level planning for a high renewable integrated system, essentially you need to move a little bit away from the conventional way, because it's highly likely that your most stressful period may actually not be your peak demand time. It may be actually the time when you have the lowest synchronous generation on the grid. And it's essential that planning happens at various time scales. So when you look at it from a 10-year or a 5-year horizon, you may see that you may be able to integrate a high level of renewables. But when you look at it at a sub-hourly or an hourly level, that same the extent of balancing requirements will increase, and you may actually observe that the VRE penetration is little more limited. But the real analysis will be when you do something like a transient stability analysis or a millisecond or a microsecond evaluation of the grid, where you actually see that the kind of technology interventions that you might need to integrate higher levels of renewables. So planning essentially will need to happen across time scales. Now, having said that, when you look at a system per se, when the VRE levels are at, let's say, around 10% annual energy basis, that's the time when you will need interventions related to making sure that you have sufficient reserves, you will also need, you will certainly see that there is a lot of thermal load getting shifted to renewables. So there will be a need to look at flexibility in the system or making sure that you are able to achieve a lower thermal minimum of the units. So that's the kind of intervention that you will need at a lower level of renewable penetration. As you move to higher levels, let's say at around 30% VRE penetration at an annual basis, it's important to note that when we talk about renewable penetration, we need to understand what is the time scale we are talking about. Because a 30% annual can actually lead to around 70% on an hourly basis. There may be certain hours in the year when the renewable penetration will be very high. So that's the point where you will start needing a lot of flexibility in the system. You will need to have solutions which will enable you to ramp up, ramp down, and that's the point where you will start feeling the need to have support from neighboring systems. And that's the point where I mean, a planner will understand that having an integrated system will help him to absorb. Now, so I'll give an example of that. All of us have generally heard about the California duck curve and so on, but then very few will be really knowing that California also runs an energy imbalance market, and almost 55% of the ramp up of the duck is actually provided by imports and not really from the California generation itself. So it's important to understand that an interconnected system becomes more and more important as the renewable penetration increases. Now, when you come to levels where you have 50% or 60% renewable penetration at an energy basis, that's the time when technology interventions come into picture. Now, and that is where technologies like battery storage, even before that actually, battery storage as well as grid forming inverters will all start playing a role. And that is also the time when you will start realizing that demand also needs to be managed, because if you're not able to manage the supply, you start looking at DSM or demand side management measures which will manage the load to be in sync with the generation. So interventions will include aspects at all the different phases of renewable integration, but fundamentally what I would say is that it's not necessarily as to that there is an upper limit of the renewables that you can integrate into the system. It's basically we have to take a call in terms of what are the things that we need to do to maximize the amount of renewables that you can have into a system. And solutions will include forecasting, interconnections, technology interventions, policy. You will need ancillary services market. You will need a shorter dispatch schedule so that you are able to manage the variability in the system and so on and so forth. So that's essentially what I wanted to cover as far as the planning process is concerned. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other panelist wants to top this?
Yes. So since you mentioned about the penetration level starting from 0 to all the way high up, we have observed that in the past, when you have around 30 or less than 30%, you will start to need a normal battery to address the intermittency issues. And after 30%, because of the synchronous generators are less, the system is easily to be interrupted by a fault or by like a transmission trip to have voltage issues or inertia issues. And this is why you would start to need the grid forming battery to provide those transient support. Yeah.
Perhaps I'd like to, before I turn to Dr. Ellen, Pak Yus, can you share on the role of planning and how the planning practices evolves in TNB as well on to address like this transformations of the power system?
Right. I think if we look back, what used to be done before is looking forward. Annual planning cycles of long term, and then the long term meaning 10 years, 20 years kind of projection that gives a good input to the understanding of how strategically the system will be in the future. Nevertheless, what has happened in these past few years requires a more detailed analysis, as mentioned by Arun just now. You need to go down to the dynamic level. You need to address the voltage and the differences in terms of the supply and demand, because things are changing so much. Hence, I think, which I believe the planners, the system planners are looking at addressing this issue and should be addressing and looking at it in a more detailed manner. That's number one. Number two, I think in terms of even the thermal units, the existing gas or even coal, the design or the response of those units needs to be looked at. Regulation-wise, the power purchase agreement needs to address the need for these units to provide faster reaction, faster response to the events that's happening in the grid system. So not only the system is changing, the way of doing things, the processes needs to change to address and to be able to attend to the bigger and potentially faster changes in the system.
Thank you so much for that. I think the planning processes also needs to evolve as well, like highlighted by Mr. Arun and you as well, that the resilience part needs to be there in terms of planning. So not only looking, but perhaps like more scenario planning, which also forecasting of like different weather and incidents will be important as well as part of the addressing or mitigating those risks. And then perhaps I'd like to turn to Dr. Allen. We've discussed about technology, we've discussed about planning and the role it can afford, but we haven't discussed about investment. So we need that. We now know that this kind of like power system transformations and how interconnections can help better resiliency of the grids. And then it surely needs a lot of investment. So what's your take on what kind of like investments required for this grid enhancement, and how do you see the trends of it?
Okay, thanks for the question. I think you didn't mention is that when we do the planning, always we don't have unlimited budget, right? That's the key question, is how we attract the investment. First of all, I do have two numbers I want to quickly mention. This year we have two country new power development plan, which is the Vietnam PDPA revision and Indonesia IOPTL. So if you look into the PDPA revision, so the estimated annual investment on T&D for the next 5 years is about 2.76 billion USD. And for IOPTL, next 10 years on T&D is about 35 billion. From our assessment, it's far from enough. For every year, less than 3 billion invest into the system. Consider the large size, consider the existing curtailment, consider the upcoming demand growth. So this is not enough. That's the number one thing. I think that we start to see more and more attention putting onto this lack of investment and how to make the utility company viable, especially balance the financial part. The key thing is that we cannot afford to increase our tariff too much. That's the fundamental thing for ASEAN, because we used to fuel our GDP with a relatively lower electricity price, and then we can have a good development in terms of our industry, our commercial sector. So raising the tariff is not the possible solution for our region. The next thing is how we can invite and engage private sector to invest in. So that's one thing the first thing I want to highlight from the policy angle is how and when we can design a very creative business model to encourage private sector to be, exciting and willing to invest into this kind of long-term duration project. Third-party access, build and transfer, any kind of business model, I think that's the key to accelerate the investment over there. The second thing is we do have Arun and Mr. Chen from the technology side. Another thing I want to mention is when we talk about reliability and resilience planning, we always put pressure on utility side. You need to spend. Actually, we can now, from technology side, with a lot of new technology, can help the grid. We talk a little bit on this, but there's even more. This is the second thing I want to see is when people talking about the flexible generation, somehow we're a little bit limited. If you look into like a PDP-8, the definition of flexible generation is the pump storage, battery storage, and open cycle gas. Actually, the technologies can help the grid is far more than this. There could be grid forming virtual power plant, could be synchronized condensers, could be others. So we need to broaden our view on technology selection. All of them can help our grid to make it more reliable, more flexible. I think that aligns with what Arun just mentioned, right, for the planning. And I think that's it. I want to share back to the topic about the investment. So the investment we should see from the policy change, from the private sector engagement, and also the new technologies.
Thank you. I want to dig more on that questions because you highlight very important points of like we need to basically to have this technology available to mitigate or like to handle these issues. There is needs to capex and investment. So it means like cost. But you mentioned that we cannot like to keep the affordability and then to competitiveness of our industries. The tariff needs to be cannot go so much. So you mentioned the role of private in contributing on this. In this kind of like ASEAN market, like we have different types of electricity market. Some like Singapore, Vietnam, Philippines, we have like liberalized market, but the rest is basically like single or like vertically integrated market. How, do you see how like what kind of like business models or like private participations in these different kinds of like markets could be available in helping like take off some of this investment from the utility side?
Okay, I think you touched base a very interesting topic is about market reform. I want to share is market reform never stop. If you look around, even the developed countries like Australian market, Japan market, or other markets, they keep doing market reform. And so far, it's hard to tell which format of the market is the best to fit into the future technology fuel mix. So that's my first item to address your market reform. The second thing is, I think I mentioned yesterday on the panel, is the key thing is trying to make the project bankable and enough revenue, is trying to create enough revenue stream. Yeah, for the brand new technology, maybe the government incentives and the government policy rebate can help to start. But after that, if you want to scale it up, a good market setup or policy setup to make it more revenue stream, more available revenue collection, that will be the key for the private sector to be engaged.
Any other, yes?
Can I just add a bit? Sorry, Arun. No, it's very interesting because you are right in pointing out there's no, there's no silver bullet yet. There's no one correct answer, especially when you are dealing with different economic structure, different objective for the need of the country itself. However, I think the days when people are planning using worst case scenario are over. You should go on multi-scenario planning. You should evaluate and the need to understand on how to make it bankable is very, very important. So I'm calling for consideration and understanding, especially from the powers that be, to make sure that, whatever that we try to do, we have to first understand that the private company, the investors needs to get a reasonably competitive returns with the risk that they are taking. So it's just by imposing something which might be protecting purely only looking from one side of thing might not work. So thank you, Doc, for highlighting. Arun.
I'll just like to add to what panelists have mentioned is that, when we initially started looking at battery storage installations in a certain market, we found that, it only makes sense for an investor to go for a best solution if there are multiple revenue streams available for it. So it should be able to get revenues from RE shifting, it should be able to get revenues by providing reserves, it should be able to get revenue by providing some amount of voltage support and maybe even black start. Now, so it's extremely important, as Mr. Fuse mentioned, is that, it is that there is a visibility of the revenue to the developer so that they take that risk of investing in a certain project. And secondly, policies should be adhered to in such a way that if the technology is in the initial stages, there should be some amount of what we call as viability gap funding to make sure that the technology, as it matures, you are supporting it to, you are providing market conditions which support its growth. And of course, the last thing is that, you know, risk allocation also is a very important thing. So risk should be actually allocated to that entity which is able to mitigate it. So I think these are the 3 points which I want to mention. Also, in any system, it's important to understand that every technology has a role to play. So you may not be able to limit it to only one. Each and every player has something or the other to contribute. So it's not that they are competing with each other. They may actually be complementing each other. Yeah, thanks.
Any additions from
yeah.
Mr. Chan?
I also want to chip in a bit regarding Alan's remark on the market reform. So I think electricity market is very important, especially ancillary service market, because the grid needs some services to make sure the grid is reliable. Then we should have a market to have incentive for the generation or the battery storage to provide such services.
Yeah. Then I'd like to, we mentioned that there are, technology-wise, there are a lot of options, and perhaps the tweak or the interventions needs to be there in the regulatory and the policy way to enable like different types of markets or business model to help this power system transform. So in that view, I would like to turn to Mr. Yus as well. What kind of like innovations that the NB is doing right now in terms of technology, especially like smart grid digitalizations or hydrogen-ready infrastructure, which the NB is now looking forward to integrate in the system?
Yep, thank you. I think looking at some of the initiatives that we have already rolled out, one is the movement from enhancing or involving AI and digital, converting our analog substations to digital, enhancing the use of AI for our forecasting. So these are the so-called, by now it's already a BAU, if not yet, you know, innovation that we have pushed through over the years. Other than that, I think the Malaysian market has started to look at BESS. The allocation from the government to the utility under the IBR scheme has also recognized, you know, there could be higher expenses for the strengthening, enhancement, expansion of the grid system to cater for the ever-increasing demand, to cater for ASEAN Power Grid initiative. So these are being addressed as we go. And also moving forward, I think we cannot discount the capacity building and the increase of knowledge needed for the people, for the staff to be able to realize this over time. So we are addressing and working very closely with the regulator, the government, to so-called come to a policy or regulation that will enable us to move towards energy transition. We are shaping and we are leading and also enabling our staff, making our staff to be ready to conduct all this over time.
You touch upon like there is a need for a capacity building, and also there is a need for enhancing the human resources as well. And I'd like to ask, like from bird's eye point of view, because we can go on and on discussing this topic, but due to the time, I think I have one closing questions in terms of looking at the bird's eye view. Then how can ASEAN work together to address this grid resiliency issues together through the ASEAN Power Grid? So I'd like to ask every one of you on your take on these questions, perhaps starting from Mr. Chen.
Okay, thank you, Shani. So my answer would be regulation or grid code for the Asian grid. Earlier I mentioned about the cascading failure of different countries. So we need to have all together, everybody agreed upon some kind of grid code to make sure everybody's grid is reliable. And if we look at Europe, so the TSO for the entire Europe, and also they have an organization called Senelec, which is the generation committee for representing the entire Europe. They have sit together and then looking at the future potential issues, and then they have made the draft for the RFG 2.0, which is making sure there's going to be grid forming technology involved. There's other safety issues being addressed. So the Asian grid should also think about this approach because grid code can take several years to be actually published. So my suggestion would be we should start acting now. Thank you.
Thank you. Then I'd like to turn to Mr. Arun.
Yeah, so just to summarize, I think as Mr. Wang mentioned that, harmonization of grid codes is a key thing because technology interventions can actually, and interconnections can also happen very smoothly if you have harmonization of technical standards as well as grid codes. So that's the first thing. Secondly, it's important for the AMS countries to also realize that having an interconnected system will be mutually beneficial for the entire region as such. So that's the second point I wanted to address. Thirdly, I think it's not a single player who can do this transformation. So there should be a cohesive action between policymakers, utilities, developers. There will be a significant role that will be played by private entities also in terms of providing their capabilities as well as financing to make this happen. And lastly, technology interventions is something which we should be open to because the good thing is that as the technology progresses, there will be a possibility to have more renewables into the system without affecting the resilience and improving the resilience of the grid per se. I think these are the main aspects that I wanted to cover. Thank you.
Then Dr. Allen.
Okay, from my end, I think it's still the thing from the guidelines to implementation or to the action plan. For me, that's most important. We do see the net zero targets, the different NDCs, and then that we need to translate that to some encouraging policy tools and more movement. And you mentioned the ASEAN integration is not a new topic, has been there for many years, but now we start to see more and more activities and actions. That's very encouraging. We're wishing to see more, and so the countries can work together to build it up.
Mr. Yus, perhaps your take on this.
Okay. First and foremost, I think I'm not sure if ASEAN realize where we are as a combined market. I think ASEAN is placed number 5 in terms of GDP in the world. So that's a good starting point. And electricity is a driver, economic driver. So the need to realize that as a whole, we are very, very strong. We are well positioned. It is an emerging market that is continue to grow with relatively, good population growth, good economic growth, good electricity demand growth. So by having this understanding, I think it's a point to drive all ASEAN countries to come together and to work towards having a very strong or moving towards having a very strong grid system to enable more increase in economic activity. That's number one. Number two, I think what we have seen, we are not starting from zero. We already have readily connected systems, and perhaps for us to expand and move further in terms of the interconnection, realizing APG is what makes it happen before. So for example, if you look at Malaysia-Singapore, what makes Malaysia-Singapore interconnection works, and we have gone through the second improved version of Malaysia-Singapore, whereby the capacity is enhanced, further enhanced. So that is number one. And secondly, how does both sides benefit from that connection to further drive, future connection, and how ASEAN can work together, learning from this. Another point to note is also we have also done multi-countries transfer through Laos, Thai, Malaysia, Singapore arrangements. So whatever that we can learn from that, whatever good or bad that we can learn from that, should be a good starting point for us to move forward and to learn and perhaps improvise or innovate from what we already have. So we are not starting from zero. This ASEAN Power Grid initiative is not something new, but I think there's a need for us to have common understanding, realizing, where we are, where is ASEAN positioned in the world, and the potential that we have, and trying to capitalize on what we have learned before to move forward.
Yes, I like your point in that we are not starting from zero. We've been doing this for quite some times, and I think we need to look back and in the first place, why we are starting the ASEAN Power Grid. And I think that's still relevant on how we want to make more interconnections, and perhaps it gives more purposes now, because now the challenges that we are discussing are quite different from like 5-10 years ago. And I think the role of interconnections on providing enhanced resiliency for the grid system is something that is more pertinent, and we should look that through the more coordinated planning within the system or like beyond the system itself. I think this is something that we've been doing in ASEAN platform under our cooperations in doing the ASEAN Interconnections Master Plan study, where this is actually a platform for different utilities to plan together to see beyond their sort of like planning jurisdictions, so that they could realize the benefits. Because then we need to also see sort of like the different technology, what's available and what stage that we need to look at in the grid system, where to introduce them and what kind of business models, or like how to initiate an incentive to provide those technology to come, and then to have a private contributions as well in playing, because this is something that utility cannot do it alone. It needs to be a combinations between utility regulators, system operators, policymakers even, to drive the transformations of the market itself. So I'd like to check if there is any questions from the floor. Perhaps we can take like one question. If not, then let's give a big applause for our speakers today for very insightful discussions. And close this event, I'll hand it back to Madam MC.
Another round of applause for our moderator and our panelists, ladies and gentlemen. Our first plenary of the day, keeping the conversation real, offering the reality on the ground and some practical solutions and real case